Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with a special guest, Vince. Welcome to the show. I just got tongue tied a little bit because I'm nervous. You're important to the JFK community, as I've heard from many other JFK experts like Paul and Jim. And please, before we get right into the topic, introduce yourself to everyone out there listening.
Yeah, sure. I'll keep it brief. My name is Vince Palamara, and I'm pretty much known for interviewing a lot of agents that protected President Kennedy. Actually, agents that protected presidents down from FDR up to Reagan, but mainly the JFK, assassination, JFK era. And it led to my first book, Survivors Guild, The Secret Service and the Failure to Protect President Kennedy. And it's encompassed, you could argue it's basically encompassed 20 years of my life, because really from the time I was a young boy up to the time, like we're talking like the early millennium. At that point, I contacted a lot of these gentlemen because there was a lot of things I had questions about the security or lack thereof in Dallas, and just protection of President Kennedy in general. I'll just mention, well, we'll get into this later. I get into some of the nuts and bolts, but we'll get into that later. So basically, that's what the first book's about. And then, again, I'll keep this brief. Second book, JFK from Parkland to Bethesda. This is on the medical evidence. I had interviewed and corresponded with a lot of Parkland doctors and Bethesda people, so from both ends of the line, from the Parkland where they tried to save his life, and then obviously Bethesda where the autopsy was done. So this is a compendium of all the medical witnesses, what they thought about the wounds, where they said the wounds, the majority said the back of the head was gone. A lot of them said the throat wound was an entrance wound, and so on. Third book, I have five. Third book, Not So Secret Service. Agency Tales from FDR to the Kennedy assassination to the Reagan era. This is basically the loose ends from my first book, and it covers briefly some of the other presidents involved in some of the agents I spoke to. This one's even more in depth on that point. This is Who's Who in the Secret Service, and this is basically the good, the bad, and the ugly of the Secret Service. All the infamous agents, famous agents, good agents, bad agents, you name it. A lot of Kennedy detail agents are in this, but also agents going all the way back to, you could actually argue post-Lincoln, but really from McKinley up to the Trump era. And last but certainly not least, Honest Answers about the murder of President John F. Kennedy. This came out last year. It's doing very well. This covers the assassination in general. The other books were kind of like specialty books, medical evidence, the Secret Service. Well, this covers the assassination in general. What happened was, after years of reading and researching and come up with a lot of things, and I show my journey. I'm very honest about it. That there was one time we talked about this off air that I briefly went to the dark side and believed that even though there were multiple conspiracies to kill Kennedy, I believe begrudgingly Oswald beat them to the punch. That was just for a 6-month period in 2007, 15 years ago. After that came to my wits, and I figured it was a good way to be honest about what we know, what we don't know, what we may never know. And also my own journey where I kind of flip-flop briefly and shows the reason why I did. And this is all the hard evidence of conspiracy. And but we could start over from scratch with the Secret Service. So that's basically the 5 books. Yeah, let's give a little background there.
I want to talk about kind of what you've written in each individual book. I'm trying to remember the category. I know the first one was about Secret Service, but I want to question from my own, do you take Abraham Bolden's account valid? I've heard a lot of interviews with Abraham Bolden. I don't see a reason for him to lie. The fact that he was pardoned because he was in jail on some trumped up charges, but I've also heard people say you can't believe. So I'm involved in the JFK community on Facebook. I know you are as well too. That's a fucking landmine of hell.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
You could frame that, man. You could frame that. Well said.
But
yeah,
so everyone's so divisive and everyone's so back and forth. And then there's people with multiple accounts and stuff where I just look at it like I've seen people bring up points like there's no accounts of 2 assassination attempts prior to that one that happened at Dealey Plaza. And I go, well, there's evidence that there was 2 assassination plots and that has came out. But when it comes to the witness encounters, I brought up a couple of times, not just the eyewitness encounters that pictured a back hole, but the most prominent one before we get to Abraham Bolden is Clint Hill. Clint Hill has wrote a book about it Clint Hill has talked about getting up on the back of that car and looking through and seeing a giant hole in the back of the head. And you hear all this and people go, if this was all a conspiracy, why didn't they just kill Clint Hill? And I go, well, you have one person that's publicizing it and getting it in books. And I go, that there's no point of killing him at that point, because you would just be like, he's going for media attention, which is how they paint him out to be.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, on your point about Abraham Bolton, yes, I definitely think he was credible. There's plenty of documentation. First of all, he was a Secret Service agent from the Eisenhower to LBJ era. There's documentation. He was definitely on multiple trips when Kennedy visited Chicago. See, the first thing is that Abraham Bolton was a 30-day temporary agent of the White House detail, which is standard thing. Whenever a field agent, out in the various field offices, St. Louis, Chicago, Pittsburgh, you name it. Well, if the agency feels you're worthy of a little bit of a trial basis, they'll do it for 30 days. And he went to the White House. He was the first African-American agent of the White House detail. Plenty of documentation to back it up. And there's plenty of documentation that came out from the late 1990s onward that he guarded Kennedy and one time Johnson whenever they came into Chicago. There's no doubt about that. I did a detailed blog earlier this year on my main Vince Palamara Secret Service blog, detailing about the Chicago plot and to a lesser extent, some of the Tampa, Miami threats. But there's absolutely no doubt that it was a Chicago plot that was hampered. I mean, I don't even know why at this point anyone's arguing about it. In fact, actually, I wrote this detailed blog with a lot of documents and photos and so forth amended to it in reaction to some of the stupid comments I saw from lone nutters saying it. Oh, there was no Chicago plot. Oh, this is no good. As far as Abraham Bolton, I definitely believe he was framed. Not only was he was the first African-American agent of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, he was personally selected by President Kennedy to join the White House detail as the Jackie Robinson of the Secret Service, the first African-American agent. I don't think that this man who had several kids and was a good agent, had a tremendous track record up to that point, is going to jeopardize his career over a bribe with an agent he was trying to send to jail himself. And during the first trial, the one guy who was obviously Abraham Bolton was trying to send up the river, so to speak, he could have lied and said, oh, yeah, he did it. But he said, I was let you know, the prosecution told me to lie in the Bolton case. So that speaks volumes. Here's a guy who could have lied himself and said, oh, yeah, Abraham Bolton's a rat fink. He tried to accept a bribe from me, but he said, no, the prosecution tried to, basically get me to lie. When the district attorney, who I think was dirty as can be, was put before the court and the judge asked him, is this true? He says multiple times, I want to assert my Fifth Amendment privilege. Fifth Amendment privilege, huh? Why? Because obviously he did set up Bolton. This was the time, keep in mind, even the Civil Rights Act had just been enacted. Oh, America in general in the South and whatnot was so racist. And, they looked at someone like Abraham Bolton, who was new to the detail at the time, the 30-day situation. And they were like, how dare him come out and talk about agents being lax? How dare him talk about agents drinking? When meantime, it's true. They were lax and they did drink multiple times. In fact, infamously on the morning of the assassination, plenty of documentation, testimony about that. But circa 1964, 65, 66, that was shocking, to put it mildly. This is before the internet, before investigative reporting. People took everything at face value. So there's probably a lot of people picked up their newspapers and, thought racist thoughts, I'm not even going to say. So this black guy, this agent saying all this stuff, how dare him say this stuff? See, now we would take it with, we would be like, this sounds like this could be something to this, because we've since heard a lot of racism in the Secret Service and racism in America, and a lot of other things about lax security, agencies of the American government not stepping up to the plate and being as good as they could be. But again, this was shocking back in the day, and coming from a black agent especially. So that sums up. So I definitely think Abraham Bolton is credible. I think the Chicago plot and the threats in Miami and Tampa are credible. And like we said, you got to take the internet with a grain of salt, because especially on Facebook and the forums, there's a lot of idiots out there. There's a lot of people that they don't have books and whatnot, so they espouse goofy stuff, and they're trolls if they are lone nutters. So you got all that.
He mentioned in his interview, I think it was on Black Ops Radio, where he talked about, no, it wasn't on Black Ops Radio, I think it was on another show. He talked about that they assigned him to be in the washroom, like down the stairs in the washroom to where for detail. And he was like, well, I'm never going to meet the president now because I'm down here. And then the way he says it was like, and then the president, he always used that washroom as soon as he goes in. And I go, I think they were putting you down there though, is because there was more of a racist thing. I don't think it was I don't think they wanted to have you up in front on top with everybody. I think they wanted you down there to kind of push you
It
away.
backfired on them because
Yeah.
Kennedy needed to use the restroom. And he says, Mr. Bolton, after they introduced each other, has there ever been a African-American agent of the White House detail? He says, no. He says, we'll have to correct that. And then again,
So that's a good gut feeling
days.
I got then.
Yeah, there was no doubt about it. It was definitely, they were shoving him out of the way near the restroom of all things too.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, but it backfired because Kennedy was a human being. He needed to use a restroom. So luckily at that point in time, he went there, and rest is history. But yeah, as far as like my first book, what I detailed, because a lot of people, when they looked at the Zapruder film, obviously they were looking for evidence of conspiracy, and I did too. But what really struck me was, wow, the agent behind, the wheel of the car, William Greer, he slows the limousine down. If you look at the film, because everyone's so focused on Kennedy and the Connollys, and rightly so, well, Bill Greer slows the car down almost to a stop, near stop. Many of the witnesses, 75 witnesses said the car either stopped or came to a near stop. That's how slow it was. He disobeys an order from Roy Kellerman, who was the assistant special agent in charge. He was nominally in charge of the trip. We'll get into that in a second. Tells him, get out of line, we've been hit. So even though Bill Greer had the proper training and common sense, here's a shot, sees distress in the back, he disobeys the direct order and stares back at Kennedy again until the fatal shot makes its mark. Only then does he face forward, hits the gas. When it's all said and done, he lied about this. The Warren Commission said he never saw sight of Kennedy, when there's no doubt he saw Kennedy, no doubt whatsoever. And he lied, said he hit the gas after what was probably the second shot, when he didn't do it till after everything was said and done. Only then did he hit the gas. And interesting thing about Greer, Greer is one of my three suspects of the Secret Service. We can get into that, but I'll focus on Greer real quick. Greer, Emory Robertson, Floyd Boring are my three Secret Service suspects, agents I think crossed the line. Now, as far as Greer was, interesting thing here, it's kind of a little random order, but Bill Greer died in 1985. He had only one child, Richard, his son. I contacted him out of the blue in 1991. And I asked, we were having a little friendly conversation, a little guarded on his part, but friendly. And I asked, I said, what did your father think of JFK? The air was sucked out of the room. It was as if I asked you a question, you didn't say anything. It's like, oh boy. And I stumbled and I went on to some other stuff, which he was, gladly answered. I went back to him, sir, what did your father think of President Kennedy? And he paused. He says, well, we're Methodists and JFK was Catholic. And before you can digest that, wow, what a bizarre answer. You think to a total stranger on the phone, he would have lied. So, oh, yeah, he loved Kennedy and Kennedy loved him. Instead, the first time he didn't answer. Second, he says a bizarre thing about, well, we're Methodists and JFK was Catholic. It wasn't until quite a few years later, covered evidence. This came out in the Irish Times, and they corroborated with some of my research. And thank God they did some of the research on their own in Ireland. I don't know the time or effort or money to go to Ireland and do this. That Bill Greer was part of the Orange Order. And in Ireland, there's been, people know for years, generations, hundreds of years, there's been this fighting between Catholics and Protestants, Methodists and whatnot. And Bill Greer only came to this country at the age of 18, between the age of 18 and 19. So he was born and raised in County Tyrone, Ireland. He's part of the Orange Order, which is naturally against Catholics. When he comes to America, he worked for a time with a family in Brookline, Massachusetts, which is JFK's birthplace. He worked for a time with JFK's two-time political rival, Henry Cabot Lodge, who JFK defeated twice. And obviously, he had to have heard all the rumors about Joe Kennedy Sr. and the bootlegging during the Prohibition days, all the rumors. He had to have known, and I love President Kennedy. His one fatal flaw, if you want to call it that, was womanizing and whatnot. He had to have known about all that. So you put that all together in a mulligan stew, and that, to me, gives me probable cause for a motive through inaction. Sometimes it's not always action. It's not the pulling of triggers and whatnot. Sometimes it's just sitting back and letting things happen. And I think Greer was in a perfect opportunity to do that. And this ties into another major discovery of mine. Back in 1997, I'll keep this brief, I discovered, shockingly, that one of Kennedy's drivers, there was only a handful of Secret Service agent drivers, Thomas Shipman, died of a heart attack October 14th, 1963 at Camp David. And I was like, wow, this is news to me. I never heard about this in any book, article, nothing. Keep in mind, this is when the internet was still basically new. Nothing online, nothing whatsoever. No agent ever mentioned him, other than one agent mentioned who he was, but never mentioned he died suddenly. And through the intervening years, and I document this in my first book and the third book, and a little bit in the in the fourth book by Thomas Shipman. I have a whole chapter in the third one. That not only did he die after passing an annual physical, these agents were supposed to be in tip-top shape, and he was a driver agent. You can't have an agent has the honor of driving the president having some sort of coronary issue when he's driving the president, the first lady, dignitaries, etc. So he just passed his annual physical. He dies at Camp David. He's the only human being, let alone agent, who died at Camp David. He died a month before the assassination, which gives Greer the opportunity to drive Kennedy in Dallas. Well, I found only just a few short years ago, Shipman's surviving family. They didn't rain on my parade at all. They didn't seek remuneration. They didn't seek any publicity. And they came out, and here again, stranger on the phone and in emails, and they all basically said the same thing. That, oh, we were shocked for years. He was buried quickly. We were told to bury him quickly by Dr. George Berkeley. Dr. George Berkeley was JFK's physician. Some people have suspicions of. Okay. They didn't rain on my parade, which could very well happen. It happens. They could have said, oh, there's nothing to this. Get a life. My father had a heart condition. They all said the same thing. They were all shocked. He was a young man. He was only like 50 years old. He just passed his annual physical. There was no problem. And he goes to Camp David and he dies. He was looking forward to the Dallas trip too, because they had family, extended family in Dallas. I got this from Laura Shipman, who was Thomas Shipman's daughter. I got this from a niece of his. I got this from other surviving family members all together. So again, no raining on parade, and they didn't seek remuneration. They weren't like, hey, am I going to get some money out? No, they didn't want to send, they didn't want any publicity. They almost wanted to go anonymous and don't do that. Anonymity is not good, but people will think I'm making it up. You got to state your name. Yeah, you're right. So what that leads to is certainly leads to suspicion, to put it mildly. Here we got, a driver agent of Kennedy. There's films and photos. In fact, I have a whole YouTube video where I called some of the films together of Thomas Shipman driving Kennedy. In fact, one of the last major trips that Thomas Shipman drove Kennedy was to Milford, PA, which is Mary Pinchot Meyer estate. See, there's so many subplots and whatnot to this whole thing, so many areas of exploration. You can get caught down the rabbit hole. But again, for your listeners, it takes Thomas Shipman out of the way through a suspicious death before. Everybody hears about these deaths after the assassination. This is a month before. And it gives opportunity for Greer, who was extremely inept. Even people that believe Oswald acted alone, like Gerald Posner. In 1993 on CBS, he said that Greer was the reason of the success of the assassination, because he showed what Dan Rather was showing the film. And I'm like, son of a, I wrote to Gerald Posner snail mail a year before and told him all about Greer. And I'm like, son of a gun, well, to get any credit, but that's another issue. But he showed the American public, he shows slowed down versions of Bruder film, Greer turning back twice, and etc. So there's that. I mean, that's just the basic element. Just like I always tell people, imagine if you had a loved one in the back seat and you heard distress, you heard a shot and you saw distress. Are you going to sit there and do nothing? And this is a Secret Service agent trained to protect the president, and he was properly trained. Sometimes you get trolls online and say, oh, Vince, you're using 2022 glasses with 1963 standards. No, the Secret Service, in fact, Thomas Kelly, who was the inspector of the Secret Service, testified in 1978 the agents were properly trained what to do, evacuate, cover, and evacuate. And if you want, I can get into my other two suspects. You want me to get into that?
Yeah, I just want to mention, when it comes to the Zapruder film, I've mentioned to Gary Aguilar, who kind of went in depth. It's going to be, when we hit the medical evidence subject, that's going to be one that I'm going to be able to shine on a little bit, my knowledge on that one as well too, because he went in depth on that. But when we talk about the Zapruder film, I mentioned to him, I was like, do you think that it was altered? And he said, I don't know, but even if it is, it's still a damning kind of thing. And I do believe that. I definitely think there's a segment of it that is altered. I think it's that frame 313. And then there's another frame. I talked to Richard Bartholomew, who talked about how Connolly had to make the magic bullet. They have this bullet that goes through someone and makes all these wounds. The way that he described it is when someone turns around like this and they have their knee up, like you'd be looking back at the president who you just heard gunshots. The way that everything's angled makes this perfect straight line that connects from the back of his thing where he was hit all the way into his wrist, and then it could easily pop down into his thigh because they're all like side by side next to each other. You don't need to make this bullet go through someone's back, out their wrist, and do some weird trajectory into their leg. And I'm like, that makes a lot of sense, because the one thing I was never really too curious on who I was more curious on why and what we saw afterwards when it came to this. I mean, you had, like you said, after the number of people that were just, I mean, either died in suspicious ways. I mean, Jack Ruby before his court case mysteriously getting cancer and freaking going out. That's weird too. But it's hard because people don't know. They don't know about the government having this capabilities. But look at the assassinations on Castro. They had plenty of attempts of putting poison in his pills and all these weird types of weird things that were going on that make this make a lot more sense. But when it comes to Connolly and that magic bullet and that idea of like it was him turning around and that bullet going through the windshield, the frame that was edited, the Zapruder film, there was a glare on that windshield, which obviously indicates that the windshield was hit by something. And David Mantic explained it was a bullet from the front. It was that,
Right. Yeah, I agree.
which has that hole in the evidence that they have.
In my latest book, I detailed all the witnesses that said the shot, there was a hole in the windshield. Dallas police officers, eyewitnesses right there at Parkland when the limousine was standing there, and even Secret Service agents, plural. So there's definitely evidence that that windshield was hit and there was a solid through and through hole. In fact, actually, there's like 3 agents that said that, Secret Service agents. Okay. The one thing I say with the single bullet theory is it's dead on arrival in one issue. All the witnesses in the autopsy photos show a back wound, not a back of the neck wound, a back wound. And the eyewitnesses there at Bethesda, James Jenkins and others, said that this wound didn't pass through. It didn't have any connection with the neck, and it only went in like a couple inches and stopped. So when people try to extrapolate, it could have went through the back of his neck and whatnot. It's dead because this wound in the front of the throat, which the majority of Parkland, people said it was an entrance wound, doesn't connect with this wound anyway. And the FBI, Siebert and O'Neill were at the autopsy. The FBI guys, to their dying days, decades, said that there's no truth to the single bullet theory. That wound in the back had nothing to do with this. And Gerald Ford in 1997 admitted he moved the wound up. They found raw notes, the Warren Commission, where it was originally described as a back wound. He made it a back of the neck wound, moved it up, I don't know how many inches.
I thought that was Arlen Specter.
Well, that was the whole single bullet theory, but that you're talking about the single bullet theory. Arlen Specter's like the mastermind of that. But Gerald Ford had his own little play in it. In fact, it caused great publicity. There's articles and whatnot. And Gerald Ford defended himself as well. I didn't do that for any conspiracy reasons. I did that for more clarification. But isn't it funny? His own handwriting, which he admitted to. So it's Gerald Ford's on record admitting to it, that it was his handwriting that moved it from the back to the back of the neck.
6 inches.
Yeah. So that's significant. So it never even had the opportunity to go from here to here. So that point's dead. Then you get into the condition of the bullets and the crazy trajectory, to their dying days. The Connolly said the single bullet theory wasn't true, which is weird. Nothing's black and white in this case, even though he's a suspect of mine. Bill Greer and some other important people didn't believe the single bullet theory, didn't buy it at all. In fact, I have a whole, I have 12 major bullet points in the first chapter of the book about the evidence conspiracy and how many people did not believe the single bullet theory. Prominent people. We're not talking about authors and researchers, actually just principal people who were there at Parkland, Bethesda, saw the body, whatnot, say it's not true. And also the chain of custody of the bullet is ridiculous. There is no legal chain of custody of this bullet. So not only just, how it never transited, the condition of the bullet, the trajectory, but then you have the chain of custody is just crazy to put them out. So,
well, how many of the Secret Service people that were involved on that motorcade route talk about where the shots came from or how many shots that they heard? Is there anybody that gives like a good amount of detail about?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, Clint Hill, which you mentioned earlier, he always said for many years that the back of the head was gone and there was a wound 6 inches down and shoulder of the back down here. So that's evidence right there, conspiracy, because there shouldn't be the back of the head gone if Oswald's shooting from behind. If anybody's shooting from behind, his face would be blown out, it'd be more blown out here, but he's in the back of the head's gone. And obviously we talked about the back wound. You have that. He always claimed that the one shot sounded like somebody shooting a pistol into something metal or whatnot. So the one sound
silencer
was bizarre. Okay. Sam Kinney, who I interviewed many times, he was the driver of the follow-up car, just 5 feet away from Kennedy's car, also saw the back of the head gone. And one of my discoveries he caught from my interviews, he found the back of the head on the C-130 transport plane with the limousines flying back to Washington after. He put in a phone patch, this is before the internet and whatnot. He put in a phone patch to Dr. Berkeley. When he landed, one of Dr. Berkeley's assistants, Tommy Mills, grabbed the piece of skull, whatever happened to it, we don't know. But Sam Kinney was funny. Sam Kinney believed there was a conspiracy, but he incongruously also thought that Oswald was probably the only shooter. See, some of these people could never like get their story straight. Like for years, you know, up to his dying day, actually, you had three people. You had Paul Landis, an agent on the follow-up card. You had Clint Hill, who just came out. Both these guys just came out 6 years ago. And the Connollys for years saying the single bullet theory was not true, but they also said Oswald acted alone. Sam Kinney was one of those guys. The back of the head was gone. He believed there was a conspiracy, but he believed Oswald was the only shooter. So you have a lot of shades of gray. Nothing's black and white with the witnesses. That's why people always have to, you know, weigh and consider everything. That's like Forrest Sorrells. He was one of the agent in charge of the Dallas office. He rode in the lead car, which is the car that was ahead of the limousine. And he believed the shot came from the knoll. And he, but then if you would have asked him, he thought, oh, the Warren Commission, that's a closed matter. He endorsed the Warren Commission. See, some of these people could not put everything together, or they didn't want to acknowledge the one thing they saw or heard or believed went against official history. So you'd always have that juxtaposition. As far as other agents in the motorcade, Thomas Lem Johns, who was a vice presidential LBJ agent, who was just a couple cars behind Kennedy's limousine, thought the shot came from the grassy knoll. Paul Landis, in 2 reports, said the shot came from the front. When the House Select Committee contacted him, he had nothing to do with being interviewed, but I confirm what I said in my reports. Well, it goes to show you people's memories change for various reasons. In 2010, he came out and said, well, that was my impression back then, but I was mistaken. This is why you always got to weigh and consider everything and realize the ramifications of what they said at the time. You know, some of the people realize the ramifications, don't want to be caught up in conspiracy theories, so they change their tunes. You have a lot of, you know, no, I should say a whole lot, but there's a fair amount of witnesses that do that, sadly. They'll say one thing that goes against official history for a long time. Then there's a point where they sort of like realize the ramifications of it, don't want to be involved anymore. They, oh, Oswald acted alone. So you get crazy stuff like that. That's why you always have to weigh and consider, you know, the time. That's one of the reasons why I did my second book. Because what I got so frustrated with was so many books, and good books too, would say 25 witnesses said the back of the head was gone. They give you a couple examples and they change the subject. I'm like, wait, slow down. Who exactly said it? How many times did they say it? When did they say it? And this is what this book is. This is literally every single time a Parkland doctor or nurse said what they said, like 20 different times, so the back of the head was gone. And you get to Bethesda. The overwhelming majority of the medical witnesses said the back of the head was gone and the throat wound was an entrance wound. Right there is conspiracy. But it's so much to run in books, little bits here and there, that it's easy to like dismiss it and go, well, maybe they were mistaken. See how they do that? That's why this only came out in 2015. I wanted to tackle it because I had the 26 volumes of the Warren Commission. Everything was spread around there. So
When you mentioned the skull fragment that was sent back on transport, was that the Harper fragment that they found?
That's separate.
So there were 2 skulls.
That was found in the streets. Yeah, there's 2, at least 2. In fact, there's actually, again, detailed in my second book of the medical evidence, there's actually a couple other fragments of different degrees. To keep in mind, we're not talking humongous pieces now. The piece that Sam Kinney said was the back of the skull was found in the rear of the limousine on the C-130 transfer plane. He had the Harper fragment, which was a smaller piece, but the people at the hospital, I think it was Methodist Hospital, not Parkland, who, in fact, one of them I actually corresponded with, said, yeah, it was occipital bones in the back of the head. So it was a smaller piece, but still the back of the head. And there was a couple other pieces which were tragically lost in the mists of time. In fact, when you get to the Warren Commission testimony of some of the people, they talk about 3 fragments. Some talk about 2 fragments. And the fragments themselves are long gone. We have photos, thank God, of the x-rays. They're not the original x-rays, they're the photos of the x-rays that were taken by the FBI of the Harper fragment. Otherwise, we wouldn't even have that. And many current author researchers, people that are with a medical background, have said that that's occipital bone in the back of the head, Dr. Mantic, the list goes on. So you have all that. So the sad thing is the good news, bad news about the case is so much, I would say the last, 10, 15 years or so, maybe 20, has been some of the most amazing revelations in this case, because not just for the advent of the internet, so, the pipeline of information was able to flow freely, but yeah, the Assassination Records Review Board, which released millions of documents, all the interviews have come forward. Back in the old days, a lot of books were theory-based. They would have an axe to grind, they'd have certain suspect, and everything would be geared towards that, and not a lot of forensic evidence, not a lot of background. Now books now are really heavily researched, detailed from a historian standpoint. A lot of this is new information. In fact, when I talk about my Secret Service research and I talk about past motorcades, for many years, there was little or no films or photos of past motorcades. You basically had Kennedy's inaugural, the assassination, and very little in between. It's only been the last, I can't stress this enough. This blows people's minds to hear. It's only been the last 5, 10, maybe 12 years. The vast majority of these films and photos have come about through digitization, discovery. A lot of the photographers have passed away to become public domain. It used to be back in the 90s, I would order some photos from the JFK library. They cost me $100, $150. You'd have to credit the library. If you try to publish in a book, it'd be a fee. And this is before the internet was in its, early stages. So basically you had no way of conveying or knowing what other, motorcades were like. So this is getting to the main point. I have a YouTube channel with many motorcades, past motorcades of Kennedy. I just can't stress this enough how much new information has come out, because again, it used to be people would play devil's advocate. You get people trolls too and say, "Oh, Vince, come on, you're using 2022 glasses. Kennedy was a sitting duck in an open car." Not true. There's a reason why presidents lived from FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy for almost 3 years before. Major discovery mine. I have films of this, photos of this. I have Ron Gardner and ABC that day. Building rooftops were normally guarded during the FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy days. I have articles, newspaper articles from Nashville, Tennessee, Chicago, Paris, Tampa, you name it, Secret Service documents talking about how sheriff's departments, were guarding the roofs of buildings. Sheriff's department and police were intermingling the crowds. You had military lined streets facing the crowds. This is how they got around things. People can't look at post 9/11 with terrorism. Back in the old days, it was Thompson's machine guns, it was pistols, it was rifles. It was the fear of that kind of threat. And they had it very well covered. Yes, Kennedy might have been in an open car a lot of times, but he did use the bubble top in 1/3 of his motorcade. So it wasn't totally open. But in any event, people would still see a still phone and say, "Oh, look, Vince, Kennedy looks like a sitting duck." But if rooftops are guarded, if men are intermingled in the crowds, if military's lined the streets, if agents are near the car or sometimes on the handholds of the car, if you have the motorcycles surrounding the limousine, if the limousine's going at a high rate of speed, if threats are assessed and threats are neutralized ahead of time, this is the reason why Kennedy and prior presidents lived all those years. And the $64 million question. Wow, they get to Dallas and it's a city he's warned against. And just what a coincidence, security stripped on all levels. The buildings aren't watched. Ron Gardner, before many millions of people, I have the video clip. Video clip was only discovered 3 years ago. This is incredible. And he's telling millions of people that he knows for a fact that building rooftops were normally guarded. And, that's an explosive clip. It doesn't stand by itself. Because again, somebody could say, Vince, Ron Gardner is powerful, but maybe he's mistaken. He's not mistaken. I joined newspapers.com for a fee and got many old articles. I published them in my books, several of my books, and it shows, wow, he went again, Nashville, Hawaii, you name it. And a lot of times sometimes they even had a helicopter. San Antonio, the day before, there was a police helicopter, and they were shooting color film, and this only came out in 2013, of the motorcade. So Kennedy wasn't a sitting duck. There was ways around having an open society and an open car. And that's how Kennedy lived back in the day. There was no opportunity for a rifleman or somebody with a pistol to kill Kennedy. Sure, in this day and age of terrorism, yeah, he was a sitting duck circa 2022. But circa 1963, Kennedy was well protected until they got to Dallas. It's shocking. The trip before in Florida, it's the longest domestic motorcade Kennedy ever had. In fact, it's the second longest motorcade, second only to Berlin. But what did both trips have in common? Agents were in the back of the car. The car was at a high rate of speed. In fact, just real quickly, the Tampa motorcade was 28 miles long. Yeah, 28 miles long. Dallas was only between 10 and 11 miles long. Yet they had the resources to put agents in the back of the car. They had the resources to man building rooftops. Like, this only came out in the 1990s. Assassination Record Review Boards, a godsend. They came out with the Tampa, Florida Secret Service shift reports that were buried all those years. They released them. Lo and behold, right there in the advanced security, the sheriff's department has been alerted to guard building rooftops. I got a hold of Russell Groover, who was the lead motorcycle officer in Tampa, and he told me, oh yeah, all multi-story building rooftops were guarded. I said, what about single or ranch, dwellings? That kind of leave that open, because, well, we had police officers watching the buildings from eye level, street level. So that was the case. Only multi-story buildings were they guarded. But the point being is, with those agents in the back of the car, fast speed, motorcycles all around the limousine, bracketing it. And again, there's building rooftops guarded. That's why Kennedy survived Tampa. He gets to Dallas, building rooftops aren't guarded. Kennedy supposedly ordered the agents away. He supposedly ordered the bubble top away. He supposedly ordered the motorcycles away. It's all crap, but that's how they covered. And again, my earlier point, back in 63, 64, 65, people didn't question their government, or they just started to, obviously, after Mark Lane and Harold Weisberg, but they took it at face value. Hey, these are the good guys, the Secret Service. If they're telling me that Kennedy didn't want them there, well, these are just lowly agents. But a major discovery of mine, again, is that it's not true. Harry Truman, President Johnson, President Clinton are all on record saying the Secret Service was the only boss the President of the United States had. When it came to his security, by law, the Secret Service cannot veto the president. In fact, Clint Hill, really bizarre interview. Thank God he did it on videotape, maybe just for clear his conscience. In 2010, he came out and said, well, the president can tell you what he wants done, but it doesn't mean you have to do it. What we always used to do is agree with the president and do what we felt was best anyway. That goes against everything he's ever written in any of his books. And not to get on a tangent, but I've said this many times before, I don't know if you know this or not, but Gerald Blaine and Clint Hill wrote their books because of me. It might sound like delusions of grandeur, like, oh, Vince, come on, who are you compared to these guys? These guys are principal people. They were both long retired. They used to wear it as a badge of honor. They would never write a book. In fact, Sam Kinney, during my interview in 1994, said, oh, Clint Hill, you'll never get those guys to ever write a book. They have a badge of honor. Well, why did Clint Hill write his book? Because Gerald Blaine and him have been friends for 50 plus years. We're starting to see what I had on the internet. This is before my first book came out. It was just in self-published form at the time. But they started reading. In fact, in Gerald Blaine's book, The Kennedy Detail, came out in 2010. He alludes to me several times, but doesn't name me, I guess, for legal reasons. It's very obvious he's talking about me. I'm 100% sure it's me. It's not even 99.9%. And he talks about his self-described Secret Service expert and other things in the book are obviously geared toward me. What Gerald Blaine wanted to do, if his book and Clint Hill, although to be fair, Clint Hill's book on Jackie is very nice, other than a couple pages on the assassination. The point being is what these guys wanted to do is throw the onus back on Kennedy because they realized little old me was making headway on the internet. The information superhighway was influencing people and say, wow, so this isn't true that Kennedy ordered him off the car. And it puts the onus of shame and much more on the Secret Service. Well, Clint Hill and Gerald Blaine came to rescue with their books. In fact, they mentioned me 2 times on C-SPAN. I had a threatening letter from Gerald Blaine's lawyer. I had threats from friends of theirs. The list goes on, because they realized I was a threat to them. I was showing the truth. It is what it is. If these guys, what they were telling the truth, my research would have been gone long ago. I was so close to giving up this case many years ago. But what happened was I just started to discover things that were not, all these agents were telling me President Kennedy never ordered them off the car. He was a very nice man, never interfered with our actions at all. And this was the head of the White House detail. In fact, I can tell you something right now. As you know, David Lifton, his big claim to fame is finding the cyber O'Neill reports showing that there was surgery of the head area, the big body alteration area. Well, on September 27, 1992, is a day it'll live in infamy for me. I got in contact with Special Agent in Charge Gerald Bain, not Blaine. Kennedy does his Bain, B-E-H-N. And I asked him, again, this number one agent of Kennedy's detail, Special Agent in Charge, was there from FDR to LBJ. I asked him, is it true about President Kennedy? I've been reading a couple of books that he ordered the agents off the car. I got this on tape, thank God. He said, I don't remember Kennedy ever saying anything about not having agents on the back of the car. If you look at the newsreels, you'll see agents on there. I was so floored, I couldn't tell you. I got cotton mouthed. I had a hard time collecting my thoughts. But after the phone call, because I think like a defense attorney, I said to myself, Vince, even though he was very lucid, he was only in his 70s, somebody could say, Vince, maybe he was senile, maybe he forgot things. So I started contact. This is, again, before the internet was in its prime. We're talking like 1992 to 1994. Contact a lot of his colleagues, and it was like they were reading cue cards, all different parts of the country. A little stranger on the phone like me, they were all saying the same thing. President Kennedy never ordered the agents of the car, never ordered the bubble top off, never ordered the motorcycles away. This is hogwash. Where are you getting this? So Gerald Blaine, going up to like 2005 to 2010, he started to read these things online. He read his book, Kennedy, he doesn't name me, but it's obviously what he's talking about. He read this stuff. So he made up a total fake meeting on the day of Kennedy's funeral, November 25th. And supposedly the agents had a meeting to discuss, let's not blame President Kennedy, even though he did order us off the back of the car. But the book achieves that whole purpose, because people that are naive, all the Amazon reviews you see, they all say the same thing. Wow, President Kennedy, man, he had a rendezvous with death. He didn't want those agents on the car. He didn't want the agents protecting him. So that's what's happened. John Q. Citizen are reading Clint Hill and Gerald Blaine's book, and they're throwing the onus back on Kennedy that it was his, he had lapses in his private life. Well, now they're trying to say he has lapses in his security. He was fatalistic. His favorite poem was, "I have a rendezvous with death." Meantime, we all have a rendezvous with death. We're not immortal. But they use that after the fact to make it look like Kennedy had it coming. Whether it was Oswald or not, Kennedy had it coming. He didn't want the agents around the car. And again, backing up to what I said 5-10 minutes ago, I know I'm throwing a lot at you, just real briefly. When I find all these films and photos, when I interview all these agents, you put them all together, you realize, my God, on prior trips, he was properly protected. You go to my YouTube channel, people. Don't believe me if you don't want to. If you don't want to read my books, books are all heavily documented. Just go to my YouTube channel. That's free. And you'll see I have, 15, 20 videos packed with motorcade films and photos, documents, the audio testimony of the agents. Thank God I have it on tape. They're all passed away now. So who would believe me? They'd say, "Oh, Vince, you're making this up." You can hear it from their own mouths. And I even went the extra distance. Some of these guys were recorded in other situations. You could do a voice analysis. Absolutely no doubt it's Gerald Blaine. Absolutely no doubt it's Sam Kinney, Don Lawton. The list goes on of all the agents I spoke to. All right, it's damning. There's just no way around. There's no way to sugarcoat it. The Secret Service blamed Kennedy after the fact to save themselves. They were afraid of losing the agency. They were afraid of losing their pensions, their maybe even criminal, situation could happen. At the very least, it would have been the scarlet letter. But everything was taken off the onus of the Secret Service after Kennedy died because they planted this thing that Kennedy ordered them off the car, et cetera, et cetera. So,
well, that's what I grew up heading in. That's what I grew up heading into was when in high school they said that, oh, JFK never liked Secret Service. That's why he didn't want any on near his vehicle. And I was like, that just doesn't really make sense. I mean, unless you already don't trust your Secret Service. And when I say is don't trust your Secret Services, I go by Abraham Bolden's account where he talked about they're talking about how would you kill the president? Oh, from the a high building with a rifle or something like that. It's like, if that's your Secret Service saying that. Now, I wanted to take politics out of the panel episode I did. I didn't want to go to with names of left wing and right wing. I think that detracts everybody from the major point that someone died on that day. And then if there was a person who is now considered, in my opinion, a definite patsy, then we just labeled or blackballed them through history as being the assassinator of a president that necessarily it might not have been him. Where I want to ask you a couple questions on the concept of, did Clint Hill or did anybody talk about what Jackie Kennedy was doing on the back of that motorcade vehicle? I know people say that she was picking up brain, but I've also heard Jackie Kennedy say in an interview that she doesn't remember going for pieces of brain. She was in a freak out mode.
Well, no, Clint Hill was on record, in fact, of all things on CBS on December 5th or December 7th, 1975, his famous interview with Mike Wallace in 60 Minutes and other sources since that time, multiple sources. In fact, I think it's even in his books, ironically. And Clint Hill admits that Jackie Kennedy was reaching for a piece of the Kennedy skull that flew backwards. That's really about Clint Hill. I guess he has a bout of conscience. He can't totally lie. He always says the back of the head was gone. The wound was in the far down the back. Doesn't say anything about the back of the neck, but about Jackie, he always says, no. She wasn't trying to escape the car, get out. She was reaching for a piece of the skull that flew backwards. And obviously that's grist for the mill for the conspiracy people. When you put Clint Hill's observations together, that the back wound was a back wound, not a back of the neck wound. When you put together, he said the back of the head was gone. He saw it for God's sake. Not only did he write about it in reports and testify under oath to the Warren Commission, he was there inches away. If anybody would know, it would be Clint Hill. He said that. Then you throw in about what he says about Jackie Kennedy and then the skull particle flying back on the trunk. How could that happen if Oswald was firing from the rear or anybody firing from the rear? You put that all together. But see, and also another thing, only in 2016, only talking 6 years ago, very recently, both him and Paul Landis, who was on the follow-up car as well on the other side, both said they didn't believe the single bullet theory. But they don't understand the ramifications. John Connally never did to his dying day either. They wanted to have their cake and eat it too. They never realized, sir, this makes the Warren Commission's conclusions null and void. They didn't see it that way. They just saw, well, that's not true, but hey, it was Oswald act alone. You cannot have it both ways. Even the Warren Commission, everyone admits that. Everyone's one of the few people thinks, probably like a list of a dozen or so things people concede. Everyone concedes no single bullet theory. There's a conspiracy. That's what they can never understand. So much stuff is compartmentalized. So many people have agendas. So many people, it's their perspective. And again, about the witnesses, it's a sad thing, but I documented in my second book, there's a fair amount, not a whole bunch, but a fair amount of witnesses who changed their tune later on. Again, it's because the ramifications of what they were saying, they were tired of being hounded, harassed. They wanted to put it behind them. Dr. Jenkins, Marion Pepper Jenkins of Parkland Hospital was classic. From 1963 to 1978, he was saying it was cerebellum, and he was saying that it would involve the occipital region. Then all of a sudden, he does a dramatic 180 from that point on and says, oh, it was Oswald. Oh, I never said occipital. Well, he wrote it. He might never verbalized it, maybe, but I think he did verbalize it one time. But the bottom line is how they did it. You know, they're influenced by, they always say, some people say, oh, you were influenced by conspiracy authors. No, actually, most of the time they're interviewed by lone nutters. That's what people fail to realize. Other than a couple minor exceptions to the rule, most of the people in this so-called research community and whatnot, the people that made the money have been the lone nutters. Gerald Blaine, Clint Hill, David Bellin, Gerald Posner, Vince Bugliosi, William Manchester, Jim Bishop. These people all wrote massive best-selling books, or at least got big advances. Vince Bugliosi's book didn't do well. That's not true. He got movie rights and film rights. But anyway, the bottom line is these people made a mint and got tremendous publicity on TV and in print and on the internet, espousing Oswald doing it. The only people you can really point to that really had bestsellers that reached the public are David Lifton, one book, Best Evidence, which is a classic, and Harry Livingstone twice had a best-selling book with High Treason. And High Treason 2 was briefly a bestseller, but it's few and far between when pro-conspiracy books really reach bookshelves and fly off the shelves. It's almost always Oswald did it books. It's really what happens here. And then when we occasionally make, headway, that's when things come crashing down. Like the when I was on the Men Who Killed Kennedy in 2003 for the 40th anniversary, huge rating success. I never saw a dime, but I don't care about money, so I didn't give a damn. The DVDs sold like 50,000 copies, tremendous success. Well, they were all buried soon after by the History Channel, who was influenced by the LBJ family, by President Carter, President Ford, and other people. Said this is outrageous because Part 9 blamed LBJ, so they buried 7, 8, 9. I was on Channel 7. Ironically, Newsmax TV started recently, last couple of years, showing the episodes of The Men Who Killed Kennedy, but that's another story. But the bottom line is, a lot of times, that's what really gets my gall up when people try to say, oh, you conspiracy theorists are in it for the money. I have a job. I have a wife. I have
everything
to
lose.
Yeah. Whereas these people are making the mint, who are really making the money, are the pro-Oswald people. Those are the people that are really making the mint. I never understood that.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned with Jim and I mentioned with Gary is that all the people that agree with the official Warren Commission's report, they're all the ones with TV deals and all these news reports and everything about them. And that's why Oliver Stone had to go overseas and get funded by the UK for his film as well, too. That finally just got picked up by Showtime. It's not on Hulu anymore. I've seen the 4-hour version, I think, at least 300 times. I'm not even joking.
I love it. I cannot wait. I'm getting the Blu-ray. I'm thanked on the end of each, the 2-hour version, I'm thanked at the end, and the 1-hour version, it's a special thanks, Vince. I'm one of about 6 people. What happened was that this real short story, funny story about that. Well, it's not really funny, but I was actually invited to be part of it. But what happened was they were so secretive, they didn't say Oliver Stone was involved. They didn't say anything about it. And I had to travel to Washington, D.C. on my own dime. At the time, I had no vacation. It literally got down to like, for every one of these I do, there's 2 that never follow through. So I politely turned it down. If they would have told me Oliver Stone was involved, I would have made a beeline for Washington, D.C. and been involved. So that's when sometimes people, it's a shame, Vince. It's nice you're thanked at the end, but he could have got an on-camera interview. Well, hindsight's 2020. At the time, it was such a secretive project because they didn't want the media coming out like they did against the JFK movie 30 years ago and trying to nip it in the bud before it was even released. I'm a big fan. I highly recommend early next month, the Blu-ray comes out of the 2- and 4-hour versions with audio commentary by Jim DiEugenio. He's a friend of mine, a great author, researcher, and Oliver Stone. And the book of the film, the annotated screenplay, comes out as well. Can't recommend those enough. So yeah, Oliver Stone is another huge example. I'd say like David Lifton, Harry Livingstone, maybe a couple other people, and Oliver Stone. But obviously the grief that Oliver Stone got. I mean,
he was really ambushed in his event in Quebec City. There was a ABC reporter that started hitting him with a bunch of the Putin communist type topics and stuff. And it was just, it really sucks because it deters people from doing interviews. And I know he's already very skeptical about doing interviews in general. He doesn't really do them a whole lot. I think he was on Michael Shermer's show. I've had Michael Shermer on the show, but I listened to his interview on there and it was just like really like, he's 100% like debunker type person. So any conspiracies, I brought up JFK to him. He tried to debunk me on it. That was before I actually dived into the topic of it and kind of understand as much as I do now. But one thing when it comes to who do you think, like the inner conspiracy part about the Secret Service, obviously people were kind of more incentivized not to go against the official narrative in fear. Like I know a lot of people were afraid of their lives as well too, a lot of witnesses. But I mean, this leads down a whole other thing. Like, I mean, there were harassment or sexual like things about Kennedy that were coming out not even like 10 years later. And it was seen as like a slander thing that totally deterred from the assassination. Because I had a theory. The reason why I asked about JFK's wife jumping on the back of the car and was she panicked or was she looking for a skull was because I saw the recent documentary about Marilyn Monroe. And a lot of the Marilyn Monroe people talk about how Kennedy is linked in there. Now, if you went by that narrative, I go, imagine being you're a Catholic guy, you're a Catholic president, that's your whole thing. You don't want a sex scandal to break out. So whether your wife knows or not, I mean, you got to keep it on the wraps. You can't let the public know about something like that. Where, because I always remember when Connolly's wife was in an interview on Larry King, and she talked about how her husband fell bloody in her lap, and she turned
I
around
have
and
that on my
saw
YouTube channel. Yep.
and she saw Jackie Kennedy, always thought it was weird just jumping on the back of the car rather than holding her husband. And I go, imagine if you talk about like infidelity that's happening and you're a highly religious person. When I see that interview where he's doing a broadcast and he's mentioning that we're going to be, celebrating the fact that, we're going to have peace. And at the same time, we're going to celebrate having a new baby. When he says that, his wife looks exactly like Hillary Clinton during the Bill Clinton scandal, where you were like, you're ready for her to throw her shit all over the place, like just freak out. Where I go, she probably knew if there was some type of collusion with Marilyn Monroe. But then, I mean, like I said, that's my own theory. That's my own kind of idea. I don't think it's real because once I start finding out about all the allegations that came out about JFK 10 years later, so it is seen as 100% slander of a person's character to detract away from the person's assassination.
What they're trying to do is character assassination after the fact. They killed him, assassination. And by character assassination, it makes people, hopefully, that their goal is to make them care less about the victim. Like, he was a womanizer. There would have been a scandal like Watergate after. It's all bull. There wouldn't have been any scandal like Watergate from womanizing. The press didn't, back in the mid-'70s, you had Judith Kim Wexner, and that's greatly exaggerated. In fact, let me just say for the record, there's no doubt that Kennedy was a womanizer, but these women were willing. It wasn't like it was rape or sexual assault. These women were willingly went along with it. Even that Mimi Alford came out of the book like 2012. She was an intern and claimed all these years later she had an affair with Kennedy. She said she'd do it all over again. She loved them and it was great. And again, she'd do it all over again. So she obviously doesn't regret it, did she? She also made quite a bit of cash from her book. But the bottom line is Kennedy, yes, he did sleep around. That's between him and his wife. It didn't affect the country. If you want to get down and dirty, Thomas Jefferson had a black slave on the side, Sally Hemings. FDR, Eisenhower had mistresses. We all know about Bill Clinton.
Well, I'm not slamming Kennedy's character.
Oh, I know you're not. I know you're not. You're good. Yeah, I'm just talking about people in general. The point being is the Marilyn Monroe stuff's been greatly exaggerated. So with Judith Kim Wexner. In my opinion, from research and what I've read, I don't think actually, here's what I think. Either nothing was consummated or it was a one-time tryst. There was no love. There was no nothing. It was just like a tryst. Like JFK supposedly bedded Angie Dickinson and a couple other Hollywood starlets. If he did, it was a one-time thing. It wasn't this passionate affair. I don't think Kennedy had anything to do with her death in August of '62 either. That's crass. There's no evidence of that. There's definitely evidence that he fooled around, no doubt about it. In fact, ironically, talk about motive for these agents in action. 4 of the agents came forward in 1997, both in Seymour Hersh's book, and I have this on my YouTube channel, on ABC documentary. One of them was Tim McIntyre, was one of the agents protecting Kennedy in the fall car, feet away. Tim McIntyre talks about prostitution. That's illegal when you have a procurer of prostitutes, JFK, and soliciting prostitution. You think to yourself, well, what do they think of us? And he mentions Emory Roberts as one of my 3 suspects. Emory Roberts was the shift leader of the agent in charge of the fall car agents, feet away from Kennedy. He said when Tim McIntyre joined the detail, he said, Emory Roberts pulled him aside. You're going to see a lot of shit about the president. Don't mention it to your wife. Don't mention it to anybody. It was on Emory Roberts' mind a lot. After the assassination, Emory Roberts, while still a member of the Secret Service, did something no other agent has done before or since. While still an active agent, he became a presidential aide. No doubt about this. There's articles about it. There's testimony or interviews that corroborate. that while he was protecting LBJ, he was his appointment secretary. He basically, in effect, replaced Dave Powers. And this agent's supposed to protect Kennedy during the assassination. And as I explore in the coup in Camelot, a couple other things, I'll just briefly pull this out. People available on DVD, Blu-ray, and streaming Amazon. Coup in Camelot, I'm on there for 15 minutes. And I placed Sam Kinney was the driver of the fog car, foot away from Emory Roberts. And I said, is this true that Emory Roberts ordered the agents not to move when the shooting began? He goes, exactly right. I spoke to another agent, Dan Emmett. He said, that's repulsive. The agents are supposed to lunge forward, cover, and evacuate. Their own personal health and concern is nothing that shouldn't even be on their mind. They're supposed to protect the president. And you have this guy who's concerned about Kennedy's private life and the other agent concerned about Kennedy's private life, casting aspersions, talking about he's a procurer of prostitutes. And it's very disturbing, to put it mildly. It only came out in the late 90s onward, that these agents were to guard Kennedy. And again, people would say to yourself, oh, Vince, these agents are good guys. Why would they want to have Kennedy killed? All it takes is a handful of agents. All it takes is action through inaction. They're not pulling triggers. They're just letting the triggers do their jobs. Just take a couple of seconds. It's done. We got a new president who we agree with on Vietnam, on communism, et cetera, et cetera. That's all it takes. And also the agents were very poorly paid back then. It was very easy to look at maybe a little bit of money and whatnot. And somebody knew that maybe they were like, keep in mind, in the early 60s, divorce was a scarlet word. And when you consider, the whole thing about, he was having affairs, these guys were, back in the 50s and 60s, the morals are so much higher than they are now. And so a lot of these agents, quite frankly, admitted they were repulsed. They loved Kennedy in one respect, but they were repulsed by his private life. And they saw an opportunity, a few of them, I think, to let action do inaction. Greer not hitting the gas, Emory Roberts telling him not to move, and my third suspect, Floyd Boring, who, even though he wasn't physically present, he was the planner of the Texas trip from the Secret Service point of view. He's the one who gave out assignments. He's also the one who told the agents that Kennedy didn't want them on the back of the car. Yet that's a bold-faced lie. Not only on the Tampa trip, is there plenty of films and photos during 28 miles, the agents on the back of the car where he claims this happened. When I spoke to Floyd Boring, I got it on tape too. Floyd Boring told me twice and in a letter, Kennedy never ordered them off the car, never interfered with their actions at all. But I didn't say, I could have buried them, but I didn't. This was the early 90s. I was a guy in his late 20s at the time. And I wanted to keep all avenues open. So I didn't want to make enemies of these guys. But the whole time my brain is screaming, does this guy realize the ramifications of what he's telling me? He's telling me it's not true, yet he's the one who planned the seed with Clint Hill and everybody else to stay off the back of the car. Another thing that's a little, speaking of Clint Hill, what's crazy is when people sometimes, you still get people every once in a while that believe Kennedy ordered him off the car. I made great headway on that point. I say to myself, well, if Kennedy ordered him off the car, why did Clint Hill get on the back of the car briefly 4 times on Main Street, a few streets away from the assassination, if Kennedy ordered him off the car? Right there is bold-faced evidence. There's no truth to that at all. So it's all, but it takes years to ferret all this out. It took me interviewing these agents, corresponding with them. It took getting the films and photos out, which took many years. Up till about 2007, 2008, 95 to 99% of these films and photos weren't available. It was just little old me who interviewed these agents. So a lot of these agents were not on the record saying these things. So it literally took me to come out of the wilderness and say what I had to say and show the evidence of the stuff. And it was only then that people realized, my God. So that's how they did it. Again, to my early point about building rooftops being guarded, so whenever you see a motorcade, and every once in a while you see one, like Kennedy looks like a sitting duck too, put it in place that those agents, like when he went to Idaho, et cetera, I got it all in my books. And
well, go to the,
so there you go.
Go to the suspects that you think in the Secret Service who were actually super involved into the plot. Cause I have to think that some of those people didn't know what was going on and they were acting natural in a lot of those things.
Vast majority.
I think Clint Hill and some of those are, but I also bring up the point of William Colby from the Watergate scandal, who exposed it, even got James Angleton fired as well too. I mean, I brought this up to Jefferson Morley, and Jefferson Morley is a by the book guy. He's very, very 100% only what's really been reported or what's been released about it. He doesn't go into any of the conspiracy stuff. I mentioned William Colby's death. The man was found floated on an island after he went kayaking in the middle of the night while he left his dinner on the table, and all his doors were unlocked in his house. Now, a man in the CIA for 12 years and was a director of it, that's very, very suspicious.
To
So
put it mildly. Yeah.
so he says he takes that with more seriously than he did. So I go, he exposed that the CIA was not only tapping Americans' phones, but doing other horrible acts as well too. Where I start going, you're heading down this path, and what happens with Kennedy is kind of like a three-strike method before his assassination attempts, and that's Bay of Pigs is a giant strike on his thing. Him not calling in after he said something like, "I'm not going to do this." So after he said, "I'm not going to do those missile strikes," they go, he's going to end up doing it once he sees what happens. And he didn't. And it's a good thing that he
missile
didn't.
crisis. He didn't. And then he closed down the camps in 63. He ordered the FBI to close down the camps, New Orleans and whatnot. So it's a three-pronged thing. Perfect, man. You're thinking the way I'm thinking. That's what I espouse in my latest book. Yeah, it's the Bay of Pigs. It's a Cuban Missile Crisis. And the thing that really sealed his fate was he did not want to invade Cuba from that point. He closed down the camps. Yes, Vietnam, whether he would have acted. I think even if people out there believe, oh, Kennedy would have continued the Vietnam policy, there was a perception, and perception oftentimes is reality. There was a perception that Kennedy was going to be soft on communism, soft on Vietnam. So even if there was a chance that, my God, Kennedy, maybe he would have continued the policies that what Johnson did, it was perceived he was not. So that's all it takes, a mistaken perception. But I think the main reason behind the assassination was Cuba, what he did and did not do. And again, about the Secret Service. The Secret Service as an organization had nothing to do with this. 98% to 99% of these agents had nothing to do with it. All it took was 3 agents. The driver of the limousine, Bill Greer. I outlined my reasons for suspicion.
Well, you're gonna say one of these names, and I'm gonna just show this part. My grandmama mismarried one of the people that was a Secret Service person for JFK, but apparently my mom says that he was a bad guy, like a very bad guy. So they ended up breaking it off.
Oh, okay. Emory Roberts, that's interesting. Emory Roberts, the shift leader, who's the agent in charge of the agents in the fall car 5 feet away, Kennedy, and Floyd Boring. Talking 3 agents I'm suspicious of. That's all it takes. You have the assistant special agent in charge of the number 2 agent, only second to Jerry Bain. Jerry Bain, and Clint Hill even admitted this in his books, but I discovered it several years before. But to his credit, he admits that Gerald Bain, under 3 years under Kennedy, he took his very first vacation during the weekend that they went to Florida and Texas. So Gerald Bain, I always make the analogy, it'd be like going to the Super Bowl. Let's sit Tom Brady and even his backup. Let's have the third stringer go out there. That's where Roy Kellerman was. Even though he was an experienced agent, this was his first major trip on his own without either Floyd Boring or Gerald Bain. So he had that situation. So all it takes is that. You have Floyd Boring, who's planning the Texas trip, who's laying out assignments, telling agents what to do and what not to do. Agent who was right there, in Dealey Plaza, Emory Roberts. Then you have lastly, not leastly, Bill Greer, the driver of the car. You also have, obviously, we didn't even touch on it yet, the reports of people running into Secret Service agents of mysterious repute. For years, people have said, well, what if that was a CIA boogeyman? I wonder if it was an assassin. Could be, but no one ever thought of this. Could it have been a real agent or agents? And they were covering for themselves. They realized it comes out the 2 real agents there, heads are going to roll because, A, why didn't you protect the president? And also, it looks pretty suspicious that how come these guys didn't come forward? The Warren Commission and the Treasury Department got together as well. The only agents that were there to Plaza were just part of the motorcade. The 16 agents that traveled through. No one was on foot in Dealey Plaza and whatnot. But again, you have credible people. Joe Marshall Smith, the Dallas police officer, ran to the knoll, smelled gunpowder. A lady was frantically screaming. They were shooting him from the bushes. He gets there, and some guy who had dirty fingernails, looked like an auto mechanic, produced identification that he had seen before that satisfied him he was an agent. He said after the fact, it kind of did disturb me because he looked like someone like an auto mechanic. It didn't ring true with the Secret Service, but we were so pressed for time as the JFK movie does a great job in showing a little simulation of what it was like. But the bottom line is, who are these people? So that's another reason to suspect the Secret Service right there. Oswald, I always say, even though people believe Oswald acted alone are very small, hey, take Oswald by himself. The Secret Service would have did their normal professional job. Kennedy lives. Building rooftops are guarded. They would have saw that window. They would have saw someone with a rifle, abort, get that guy in the window. If they would have gone at a faster rate of speed, if agents would have been on or near the back of cars, motorcycles been around the car in greater number. Last but not least, if they would have had normally a flatbed truck of still in motion photographers was right in front of the limousine. It was there in Tampa, many other trips. And all this is on my YouTube channel. So people could afterwards can check out my YouTube channel for this. And you can see from the perspective, my God, there's Associated Press, UPI, all these BBC, you name it. And they're filming right in front of the limousine. When you see his famous newsreels in Berlin, Ireland, Paris, you know, even in Hawaii, even domestically in America, you see from that perspective. In fact, what really cracks me up, this really cracks up. There's a lone nutter out there. I'll even name him because it's no big deal. David Von Peen. And he released his own version. It came out about 5-6 years ago. There was video, black and white video of JFK's trip to San Diego. And he tries to say, look, Vince, this video debunks everything you're talking about. Look, there's no agents on the back of the car. But what the video embarrassingly shows with Mr. Von Peen, Marines on both sides of the street facing the crowd, 5 feet apart. And even the announcer, the TV announcer, there's a TV announcer because it's being filmed live. There's 2 flatbed trucks right in front of the limousine filming and all these eyewitnesses. But he even mentions, yeah, there's Marines, boy, just about 5 feet apart all around this route. So they're all over the place right there. Then you could see people's heads and you could see police officers' caps throughout the crowds themselves on each side of the street. So you have, again, you have people filming and photography right in front of the limousine. So you don't need Abraham Zapruder and amateurs. They're right there. They were canceled at the last minute. Dallas Morning News photographer Tom Dillard made a great play of this in his Warren Commission testimony. And on C-SPAN in 1993, they put them totally out of the picture. The flatbed truck was canceled at Dallas at the last minute. Guess who did it? The Secret Service. But the bottom line, this video comically tries to debunk me. It just corroborates me. I made my own version of the same video and show the Marines all around facing the crowd. You can see police officers' hats in the crowd. You see, so in other words, what I'm trying to say is it wasn't always a police state. Agents weren't always in the back of the car. Very true. Even though the bubble top was used a lot more than people think. I discovered about 1/3 of all his motorcades, not just a handful. Some people say, yes, fair enough. The bubble top wasn't always used. But there was enough elements of security. There's a reason, again, why Kennedy lived, and that's what it was. And again, you cannot look at 2022 with the age of terrorism, whatnot. Oh, yeah, he's a sitting duck from 2022 standpoint, no doubt. Just because, you know, it's a whole different ballgame of germ warfare, terrorism, the whole 9 yards, how you can make home bombs and all that stuff. Yeah.
When it comes to the autopsy and the Secret Service pulled out guns on people, why do you think they did that? Because I've seen multiple documentaries that talk about it's because Jackie Kennedy wanted her husband. And I don't think that's true. I think they were trying to get these people to not look in deeper to the fact that they probably killed the president, or they killed the president.
No, here's a story about that. That happened in Parkland, not at Bethesda. What it was when he was officially declared dead at 1 o'clock, although for all intents and purposes, he was killed out. Billy Plaza, although he technically had a heartbeat, technically had a pulse. And doctors, God bless them, had to do what they had to do to at least try to, you know, get him to live. But the bottom line is, no one disputes this part. It's in Bishop's book, Manchester's book, official stories, official books. And that, yeah, the Secret Service, using very rude language, as Aubrey Wright told me, he was a O'Neill funeral ambulance driver. They brandished their weapons, says, this is the president of the United States. We're taking them back to Washington. But back then, it's hard to believe now, back in 1963, the murder of the president was not a federal crime. It was a state crime. So it was under the purview of Dallas County. They should have done an autopsy there. Earl Rose was a fantastic autopsy doctor in general. He did a fantastic autopsy of Oswald. No one disputes. He did a fantastic autopsy of J.D. Tippit. But JFK's was horrific. And I think the reason why they hightailed him out of there, because if Earl Royce would have done it, he would have corroborated the back of the head being gone. Hey, he would have showed the bullet being far down in the back, which actually, ironically, when they got to Bethesda, a lot of those people said that, but it was buried for years. As Gary Agler and other people have astutely commented on, in 1979, when the House Select Committee report came out, it was a real bummer for researchers at the time. But keep in mind, it's 1979. It said that, you know, many people, I'm paraphrasing, many people hold on to the notion compellingly that 26 doctors and nurses of Parkland claimed the back of the head was gone. But it said in the same paragraph, in contrast, all that in dispute are the witnesses of Bethesda. They all agreed with the autopsy. None had differing accounts. Thanks to Oliver Stone's movie, thanks to the ARB. This stuff only came out in the late 1990s. It was a total lie. They did say the back of the head was gone. There's diagrams, the FBI agents, Roy Kellerman of all people, showing the back of the head was gone. This was buried for 50 years. It was going to be buried for even longer. after the House Select Committee in 1979 did their work. It's only because this damn movie got the stuff released. And Andy Purdy, who was one of the attorneys who interviewed a lot of these people, I have this video on my YouTube channel too. He says he was flabbergasted. It was appalling. I don't know who wrote that paragraph. I had nothing to do with that paragraph. That was a bold-faced lie, and he'd love to know who wrote that because that is not true. But what did it do? It was grist for the mill for the American press to say the House Select Committee might have found a probable conspiracy, but they're still saying Oswald was the only shooter. The other shooter missed. And they're saying that the Parkland doctors were mistaken because the people at Bethesda said that they agree with the autopsy report. Again, it wasn't until the late 90s that, my God, we found out it was alive. It was so many years later, just like my work. It wasn't until many years later we found out, well, the Secret Service, some people cast a little bit of suspicion, but by and large, the Secret Service was ignored for the most part. People focused on the CIA, J. Edgar Hoover, the mafia. The Secret Service were the good guys. So it's even a mental block to this day with some people. They still can't get over, oh, Clint Hill. Meanwhile, Clint Hill drank the night before. He was one of the 9 agents that drank the night before. It was his grounds for dismissal of the agency. It's in the Secret Service manual, which is reproduced a few pages in the Warren Commission files, volume 18. And he was made out to be a hero because what they wanted to do was boost the Secret Service and the morale and image of America after the assassination. Okay. Some people could argue he was a hero, Vince, because at least he saved Jackie, but he did it at a time the assassination was all over. The shooting was all over. You know, he did nothing to protect Kennedy. Yeah, and Jackie, here's the other big thing too. Jackie got in and out of the limousine on her own volition. They never touched. If you look at the films, the Nick's film, especially the Zapruder film, she gets in and out of the car. They never touch, never even like a glance, nothing. But it's been propped up for years after this brave heroism. What it really was, he was one of the drinkers the night before, and he disobeyed Emory Roberts' order to not move. So he got to the car late, either from drinking or this perplexing order not to move from Emory Roberts, and he did what he did. So I give him A for effort as far as after the fact. At least he did something, I guess. But in World War II and Korea and Vietnam, we didn't award medals for almost trying. Hey, even though the guy died, we're going to give you a medal anyway. It was all a dog and pony show for the American public, so we could have some sort of feeling of grace and good feeling. It was a whole different world back then. Like my mom and dad told me they're still doing great in their 80s. They told me, Vince, 20 people could have killed Kennedy that day. We were so devastated. All the details went in one ear and not the other. And it's only this footage came out of, it's all on my YouTube channel as well, and other people have it too, of the raw footage of ABC, NBC, CBS. Keep in mind, there were no video recorders back then. So people were hearing them one time and that was it. People were blubbering, they're all in grief, like my mom and dad said. So there's news reports of shots coming from the knoll and witnesses saying shots coming from the front. Well, people couldn't grasp front and back at that point. They didn't know about Oswald or where things were juxtaposed in Dealey Plaza. There's no video recorders, so people couldn't like say, what did he say? Let's watch his back. Everyone's blubbering. You know, the age of innocence, people believe their government like it was the gospel. So it was all a matter of the time. If this assassination would have happened 10 years later, Watergate, yeah, people would have questioned things. If it would have happened 20 years later, the people had VCRs and would have questioned things a lot more. It's all about where we were at as a society, technological limitations. And again, if I would have espoused these things with the Secret Service, I probably would have been beat up back in the 60s, 70s, maybe into the 80s, because there was a lack of evidence to back up what I was saying. These agents wouldn't have spoke to me. So there would have been no agents speaking against official history. There'd be no films and photos released. So what would I have to go on other than suspicion? Be like, oh, Vince, that's so un-American. How can you dare say he's about these agents? It's only until I interviewed him and showed the films and photos and did the contrast of what didn't happen in Dallas that, you know, it is what it is. So that's the bad thing about Father Time. Father Time's been good as far as releasing information, but it's also been bad because we're approaching 60 years. So I always say, sadly, they won. Whoever they are, whoever's ultimately responsible for the assassination, they won. I mean, we got the information out there. The polls are on their side. You know, what people believe about conspiracy, but at the end of the day, they got away with it. Kennedy was killed. The cover-up succeeded, and all we are is like a annoying fly in the ointment at this point. I mean, it's just being honest. I mean, thank God for Oliver Stone, his documentary, and we've made some strides, but not to be a party pooper. That's why I talk about my latest book, Honest Answers. That's why I call us Honest Answers. We're never going to agree. Okay, we're never going to get justice for Kennedy. It's too late for justice. Okay, we're never going to agree. I always put this out there. Imagine the fantasy. We turn on CNN one day, and my God, the government's admitting there's a conspiracy. You know what happened? you would have legions of conspiracy people saying, that's not true. That's not my suspect. This is a limited hangout. People don't believe it, even though there's a conspiracy. It's not my, my pet theory. So that's another problem you have. So.
Well, from Kennedy's assassination, I always consider that the kind of the starting point of when the government were able to cover it up, but they did a really crappy job of doing it, at least to the point where it opened up the door for conspiracy. And then I think that's also what leaked out a lot of stuff now. Like looking back from my own research, not just about JFK, but from government projects, learning more about William Colby and actually talking to one of his close friends on the show, John Ranley.
Wow.
Who was on here talking about how much personal stuff about the CIA. They do stuff for good reasons. I'm not anti-government at all. I think the government's needed, but I also think you have a lot of bad actors acting in the necessarily. If we look at the CIA, for instance, they were so used to getting their way that when someone did stand in their way, they did the same thing they did to Castro, and they deemed that person as a threat. And that threat was a threat of their way of living, their budget, whatever you want to say. I know Kennedy was trying to cut their budget a little bit as well too. And you get to this aspect of they should have never had covert capabilities. They should have never had all this stuff that they do now. And I go, when you get away with something, whether that was a skid of their teeth that they got away with something, you don't just stop. You perfect those methods. And I think that a lot of people that have distrust in their government today, I think that was an initial breaking point to show you that, no, they got away with something. And the issue where I say I like it that people are searching into this, and it fucking baffles my mind of people that believe with the main lone nut idea and all this type of stuff. Once you really look at the evidence, when you saw recently E399 that just came out with Elmer Lee Todd's initials on it, and they're like, see, if you got this wrong, that means you got everything else wrong. Hold on. Before we even say that, that's the very last thing I've ever heard any of these experts use as evidence to prove that there was a fucking conspiracy. That is way at the bottom of the list. What they always talk about is here's the skull fragment, here's all this, all the important shit. But they, in their eyes right now, the lone nutters think this is a win and this is how we prove that everything, if they've been wrong about one thing, they're wrong about it all. That's not what that means. There's plenty of evidence to back the fact that there was a giant conspiracy involved in it.
Well, not only that, to your point, I'm much aware of that. I know, but I'm on the JFK Education Forum, and I'm much aware about this. Beyond suspicions that it was added later on, whether there's a few years, a few decades, let's concede the point. Oh my God, Elmer Todd's initials were there, and everybody missed it somehow, some way. Let's just concede that point right now. There's still loads of other problems with the chain of possession of C399. There's loads of problems with the physical condition of C399. You got many prominent doctors, nurses, and people like Clint Hill and Paul Landis, agents who were there saying the single bullet theory was untenable, Governor Connolly. So you have a whole litany of reasons why, and maybe one small one has been confirmed, but you still got an avalanche of other stuff. It's not like, oh, that one thing, ipso facto. I mean, but that's what they're hoping to do. They're hoping for like one little thing, but it doesn't add up. It's one thing on their side, but there's a whole list of other things. So that in no way, shape, or form does that, oh wow, I guess that means it really was the single bullet theory is true. It's not. In fact, actually, to be fair, on the education forum, there's some people like Pat Spear, people I greatly respect, who have gone to great detail showing in a very mature, methodical historian point of view, all the reasons why the single bullet theory is not true, and even conceding that one point about the Elmer Todd initials, nothing in the big scheme of things, But he said that, that's it. Basically, he was saying the same thing, that both sides, it'd be so much healthier if both sides would admit sometimes when, well, we were wrong about this, or this little point you have is true. What I do know is one thing, I can say one thing is good, is a lot of people have come over to my side about the Secret Service, even the people that believe all is what I learned. Well, I got to admit, his security was bad. But some of those people can't take the plunge that it was nefarious. But so that part's good. There's some people with open minds that see the evidence. But see, that's the other sad thing about, like I was saying 5 minutes ago about Father Time. The bad thing is, by these initials only being discovered all these years later, it just leaves open you can't prove a negative effect of were these initials added years later. The 70s, 80s, 90s, or even more recent than that. Did someone realize that the Elmer Todd initials are claimed to be missing? And everyone's conceded the T looks real haphazard. Did someone get in there and only takes a few seconds and do something to the bullet? I mean, you can't. I mean, these things can happen. It would be easy to tamper with that if somebody had hold of it. I knew like Dr. Wecht and a whole bunch of good people, and I'm not saying they did it. They would have no reason to. Good people have held JFK's jacket, the magic bullet. They've seen autopsy films and photos. And yeah, there's supervision, but it's not they're watching you every second. Sometimes they leave the room and they leave you to your good graces, and you have gloves on, like white gloves, you're able to touch things. Who's to say in that moment someone on the other side didn't do something? I mean, that's what the sad thing about being 2022. If this would have been 1963, 64, 65, and this issue would have been alive and well, maybe people would have looked at the bull a little bit more, but it wasn't until years later some of these things became more of an issue. And again, you didn't have the high quality HD definition, photos to observe things. The thing I really have a hard time believing, I have a hard time totally conceding the point about ET, the initials, is David Mantic and other people actually had the bullet in their hand and they missed that. I know we're all human, we make mistakes. That's a hard miss to believe they missed that, but yeah, I'm getting off on a tangent. I guess basically I'm agreeing with you that, yeah, you can't just dismiss one avenue of conspiracy or non-conspiracy based on one little thing. You can't do that. It would be like me, you know what it'd be? It would be like me having one, or like, no, it'd be like the other side, showing a motorcade, or Kennedy looks like a sitting duck. Hey, Vince, this film in Roanoke, Virginia, I guess that debunks your theories, huh? When there's so much more to that. Again, not films and photos can be deceiving. Sometimes they show it looks like Kennedy's standing there when it's a still picture, he's in motion. They don't show rooftops being guarded because the angle is not going to be on the rooftops. It's going to be on Kennedy. Obviously, going to be looking at him. They're not going to be spying at rooftops. And again, it wasn't until years later this stuff came out. But see, it's very easy to pick and choose and cherry pick and try to debunk things too. So there you go.
Yeah. It sucks because you got this topic that I think a lot of people agree on some things and then some people don't agree. And I didn't realize how like kind of torn apart the community is on a lot of these things, especially the number of people that won't talk with other people. Now I've had both sides. I've tried to get both sides on as well too. It's just very hard because once you have like a long list of people that are of a certain side, people assume that that's 100%. And it's just like, I just want to talk about it. I mean, you have to understand that your expertise and all the other people's expertise in this matter, the older generation and the people that are, I'm not saying you're old, I'm just saying the people that the people that study this type of stuff. I mean, for someone like me, I'm looking back and I'm like, Jesus Christ, like I'm learning about so much stuff, or I'm just like, I didn't know how of a topic it was so torn apart. I would mention it at my work of like, hey, like I'm researching JFK, and people would like give you like the alien look where it was like fucking, we're talking about aliens or conspiracies now, and they walk away. I'm like, hang on a second, this is fucking real. This is a real conspiracy.
You know why you got that? It's a sad commentary, and I mentioned this in my new book on Los Angeles. Another part of this thing is Alex Jones and James Fetzer, the damage they have done to the world of conspiracy.
Jim Feltzer?
Jim Fetzer.
He almost did my show, but then no, it didn't happen. I just got weird vibes. I got weird vibes.
Well, both of them are nutty. Alex Jones has been sued for millions of dollars by the Sandy Hook families. Those two people were responsible for making conspiracy theory a dirty word. After Sandy Hook, after people were briefly beside themselves, then it was like all you see in comment sections and articles was, this is a false flag. This never happened. These children are still alive. Crass, rude, horrible things like that. It actually caused a father to commit suicide over it. Because rather than people, it's the devastating loss of your son or daughter. But then you have people saying it never even happened. The disrespect, the horror of this additional thing by the Alex Jones, the Fetzers, and all the stupid theories about 9/11 where they just say it's holograms, the planes didn't exist. All this other crap. So what it's done is it's made us all look like tinfoil hat conspiracy, paranoid people. When there's a lot of good evidentiary backup to show there's a conspiracy, it's done damage. Time has done damage because the more and more people were removed from the assassination, the more they're dispassionate and they're not emotional about Kennedy, and they may believe there's a conspiracy. Like, hey, there's nothing to do about it. It's 2022 now. Hey, I got
The 9/11 thing, I'm 100% like there's definitely conspiracy stuff you can question there. I don't think planes and all that are holograms, but there's weird things about like why was this scrap material from the building sold in a matter of a week? Like they cleaned that up pretty quick where family members were like asking questions of like, well, you're doing an investigation. Why are you selling this material so quickly? I did a 7-hour episode on that with multiple different people. So digging a little bit deeper and talking to also people in the skeptic society, people that debunk these claims. There is Operation Vigilant Guardian, which was a simulation that was happening the same day as 9/11 program, a simulating of a plane going into a building. Now you have to program a simulation. What I heard that I probably stick with the most is that there's probably dozens of threats for years about a building or this type of incidents happening, and they never took it at face value. I think it's a multifactorial situation, much like with JFK. There's a lot of areas where you can Monday quarterback and be like, this is what they should have did. But I read the 893 commission report, and they even address a lot of the issues that should have been something that a normal person would have caught on day one, TSA security or just security in general at the airport. A lot of red flags that weren't caught. They were going under the radar. So
I think it's poisoned me to the whole thing. I just don't have the time and wherewithal for that whole subject. But what it is, people like Alex Jones and James Fetzer, because of what they say about Sandy Hook and other things, it just totally, like every time there's a mass shooting, oh, it's a false flag. Oh, they're trying to take your guns away. Oh, it's silliness. It just creates this atmosphere where it poisons good conspiracy topics that aren't,
it's called fantasy. Richard Bartholomew is the one that says you need to derive the word conspiracy and fantasy. When people say that's conspiracy talk or that's some type of Illuminati thing, you don't say that's conspiracy. You say that's fantasy. Conspiracy is legal lingo. They say conspiring to commit murder, conspiring to do. These are actual legal terms that get used. So I think that's.
And we have two that the government has always admitted to. The Lincoln assassination was one shooter, but it was a conspiracy of multiple people were hung. No doubt about it. When Truman, the assassination attempt, November 1st, 1950, several Kennedy detail agents, future Kennedy detail agents were involved in that, ironically, to protect Truman. There was 2 Puerto Rican nationals, 2 people, conspiracy. So we've had conspiracies before. No doubt that Watergate was a huge conspiracy. The whole Gulf of Tonkin to get us into Vietnam was a big conspiracy. I mean, the list does go on. There's genuine Iran-Contra, the money to the Contras, the whole thing about the drug wars and whatnot. So there's definitely solid stuff. It's just their whole persona. They look like wild-eyed madman, Jones and Fetzer. And the fact that they're on record now saying that we were mistaken about Sandy Hook, it just ruins everything. Because when they're attached to the JFK thing, and you have Alex Jones in 2013, the Bullhorn and Dealey Plaza going nuts, it just makes us look nutty. It makes us all look nutty. I mean, it's just the way it is. That's why I probably haven't touched other subjects too much, because it's like, then you start to look like.
Here's something that's funny is I was going to talk to one of the main people who was in charge in the NIH about the whole COVID issue. And the person messaged me and goes, just real quick about the lab scenario. He goes, do you also believe that JFK was killed by conspiracy? I got that in an email and I sent him back. I go, what the fuck do those two things have to do together?
I mean, it's what happens now. Yep.
It's fucking nuts, man. It's crazy because I think it does taint the waters a little bit as well too. It's just
sorry. You know what? I have to actually get going. It's 2:30.
You're good. I'm gonna give you a second to promote your stuff real quick.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks.
Where can people find your stuff?
Okay, yeah. Like I said, I have 5 books out now. They're all available in Kindle and paperback. Just go to Amazon.com. They're there. And if you put my name, Vince Palamara, it's always Palamara. If you go online, I have several blogs. I also have a thriving YouTube channel and, believe it or not, a TikTok channel. It's all conspiracy stuff. No pranks or twerking, whatnot. It's nothing but historical stuff. So you can just find me that way, Vince Palamara. So
I'll make sure.
I really appreciate your time, man.
Yep. Thank you, Vince. And thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for next episode.